Welcome, everyone, to Art of Advisory. I'm joined by my co-host, Kirk Bowman, and a special guest, Mike Milan, or Milan. I'll let him correct me if I'm mispronouncing that. Hey, Kirk, how are you?
I'm good, Hector. I'm looking forward to this week. This is the first time I can remember that the SEC outnumbered the soccer league 2-1. So you are going down in this episode. That's all I got to say.
So quick background. I'm not really a football guy, and these guys were chatting football on the prep, and I was saying, how about that World Cup? So that's kind of how it went. Hey, Mike, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hey, you know what? We've been talking about this for a while. I am so glad you invited me. And Kirk, pleasure to meet you, buddy. And now I know we got a buddy right there, right?
There you go. I got you, brother.
So let me give a quick background of Mike. I've known Mike for several years now. Mike happens to be at every single conference that I go and I don't go, and he travels all over the country and possibly outside the country as well, kind of discussing the product and the company that he represents. He works for a company called Finagraph, and Finagraph is sort of a financial data analytics platform that has a product for the small business accounting world called Cash Flow Tool, kind of helping QuickBooks users have just a quick and dirty information about their cash flow, future and past, so they can make better decisions about how to manage their cash flow. But Finagraph is really well known for their platform for financial institutions. So they offer a platform that allows banks, big banks, to analyze these financial statements and these financial transactions that come from the small businesses for loans and things like that. And it actually also gives the tools to banks to figure out what businesses are good or bad in terms of risk to lend to. So Mike, first, welcome to the show. Was that a good characterization of what Finagraph does?
Yeah. Do you want a job? I mean, we could put you right on the sales team today.
Yeah, I don't think you can afford me, but thank you. I appreciate it. All right, so the first thing I wanted to dive deep into is I'm actually an ex-banker, and I try to bring some of my ex-banker knowledge into my small business advisory role. And what I mean by that is I try to explain to my clients the time value of money, and why the banks lend sometimes, they don't lend sometimes, and why when banks stand to make a good deal on maybe a high interest loan, why they would choose not to lend to a particular type of business because of risk and branding and all sorts of things. And I feel that you have been in both sides of the coin here. Like you've sort of been in the small business accountant side, trying to figure out how to help them communicate better with the banks. And then you've been in the bank side, trying to figure out them how to communicate better with the small businesses. So I want to pick your brain a little bit about that. So the first thing I'd like to ask you is, in contrast, what is the difference between how a small business and an accountant looks at financial statements versus how a bank looks at financial statements when it comes to lending criteria? Like, why is there so much of a consternation between what one person believes or one group believes? Can you give us some insights about that?
Well, yeah. I mean, one of the first things that I think about is that first of all, let me take you back to when you start a business, and I'm helping build, my 10th business, or I've built my 10th business now. And you can't start a business unless you got three people on the pedestal with you. You've got an accountant, you've got a banker, and then you have a lawyer, right? And what happens is all of those three people are your trusted advisors. The first thing that happens to the business owners, they get put in the middle of a kind of a power struggle between the accountant and the banker. Both of those have your best interest at heart and in mind, but the accountant gives a piece of advice that's totally opposite of the banker's piece of advice. And the thing is, they're both right, but they're never right at the same time. And let me explain that. What I'm talking about is that the accountant's main focus at this point in time is really what I call the number 2 indoor sport in America, or the tax game. I'll let you pick, Kirk, what your number 1 is, but the number 2 indoor sport in America is the tax game. And their total focus is to help the business owner pay the least amount of tax by taking advantage of, depreciation or other expenses. Really what they're trying to do is run net profit down, because that's what you pay tax on. Well, as a CPA, Hector, that net profit gets moved over onto the balance sheet in the form of retained earnings, which is the equity part. Equity is what banks lend against. So when you have lower net profits, you have lower equity, and it just kind of is off balance. So if you're looking for a loan, you're going to need that equity to be able to fund the growth. That's really what the crux is. So a business owner has to know, if I'm going to need a loan, I'm also going to need the equity to follow.
So let me get that straight. So we got the small business accountant trying to help their clients in the cash flow game by paying less taxes legally. So right. So let me maximize everything within the legal framework to pay less taxes. Whether it's to accelerate depreciation or to show up more expenses up front, or maybe delay invoicing or shipping some products until the next year or whatever. All within the legal framework. And then the banker, which is essentially trying to help the small business owner get some cash flow help through a line of credit or a loan, wants to see that profit come in. But then the accountant is trying to slow down the profit, and the banker is trying to speed up the profit. So something's got to give, somewhere along the way. And it sounds to us like it's just very interesting. We have the same tools to do so, right? We have GAAP-based financial statements. We have tax returns. We're both working on the same tool. But why aren't more accountants in line with understanding the value of showing profit, or the value of showing growth, or the value of not necessarily having such a hard and fast tax strategy? Because Mike, sometimes you will do a lot of hard work and a lot of legal creative accounting, and you save your client 2 points or 3 points on their taxes. But then when you go out and get a loan, you can't get a bankable loan for 6 or 7%, and you have to go to a loan shark that charges 25%, and the cost of money is going to be much higher than the additional tax that you have to pay. Why isn't that message resonating more and more?
Because in my opinion only, right, is that, and this is from my experience with my accountant, is it's usually nearsighted, meaning I can't see far away. I can see everything that's right in front of me, and today is my tax burden. The problem with funding is not a today decision. Getting a loan is a 12-month decision. This is next year. Next year, I think I might need a loan. So I changed the way I run my business today in order to be eligible for a better loan tomorrow, right? I mean, because they're going to look at the trends. And it all hinges, there's a whole host of things, but it all hinges this conversation on one ratio, and that's debt to equity. Right, and that's where we focus at for at least this part of the lending equation, is that debt to equity. And if you want to know the answer to the banking test, it's 3 or less, right? Which means for every dollar that a business owner puts into his business, the bank's willing to give up to $3, right, in a loan. So knowing that that's the threshold, if you don't need funding next year, pay less tax. If you think you need funding to grow your business, then pay attention to that 3 or less debt to equity. That's kind of the advice that I give, and I think that's what your show's about, is knowing the answer and knowing what the thresholds are.
And just real quick before we get Kirk jump in, because I want to geek out on that debt to equity for a second. So on the debt portion is what you owe. You really can't maneuver much of that. Like if you owe the money, you owe the money. But the equity section, a lot of business owners can control, and the way they control it is by taking in less distributions or putting in more cash. I think small business owners need to reap the benefits of their hard work and take their distributions. But I think a lot of times they don't understand that taking that distribution is a direct negative effect on that debt to equity ratio, which it doesn't get talked about a lot in our circle. So I just wanted to geek out on that for a second, and then I'll let Kirk ask you the next question.
Yeah. Here's what I think about that is the bank is going to look at it as, are you investing in your own business, right? Of course, everybody knows that you're going to pay less taxes, but that's where the cash comes from to take your distribution, is off of that net profit. So if I'm thinking that I'm going to keep money in the business, that's me investing in the business. The bank's going to say, if you're not willing to invest in it because you're taking all the money out, why should the bank, right? You're really just sending a signal to the banker that this business isn't worth investing in because I actually strip it of all its profit. Kirk, what do you think?
So, yeah, I was pausing there because I was like, all right, I think there's another thought coming, but I don't want to steal it. So a couple thoughts that are comments I want to mention, and then I do have a question to follow up on that. So first of all, I just want to comment, and simple nod yes or no from either of you is fine. But to me, reducing profit as a tax saving strategy sounds crazy. If you have to pay more taxes, if you think about it, that's a good thing. Now, I'm not saying you should pay more taxes because you can, but if you have higher profits, you're going to owe more taxes, and that's a sign of a healthy business. So the idea that you'd want to reduce profit to save taxes, I think, is a crazy tax strategy. I'm just going to say that, and everybody else can disagree with me if they want to. The thing that I draw out of what you said, Mike, about kind of knowing that 3-to-1 ratio is the whole concept of an advisor. So you mentioned the team, kind of the trifecta, right? Banker, accountant, and lawyer. Mm-hmm. And even though the idea that a lawyer might be somebody you can trust, we can limit that for another show. I won't say anything about bankers because you're the guest. But seriously, the idea that if you're going to be an advisor, and if you're in the role of a bookkeeper, accountant, whatever, being aware of what banks look at puts you in a position to advise the business owner, to advise the people that are making the decisions, the management team. However, you have to know something about banking. You have to know something about loans. And you also need to have the wherewithal to ask the question, are you going to need a capital investment outside the business in the next 12, 24, even 36 months? And that's where the whole idea of being an advisor comes in. So I guess my question, Mike, is tell us more about how you think accountants and bookkeepers, by being aware of what banks look at and also by having a relationship with a local banker, bring more to the table when they sit down with a small business owner to help advise and counsel.
You know, that's the crux of everything as far as advisory goes. Knowing the answers to the banking test. And, you know, I do 30 financial management seminars a year, one-day seminars around the country, where banks actually bring me in to talk to business owners and accountants about how to work with them, because everything the bank does is shrouded in secrecy, right? You hand them a pile of papers this high, and they go behind a curtain. 2 weeks later, they come out and say no. You know, but nobody knows how they got there, right? So, you know, when we talk about being an advisor, those 3 people I put on the pedestal, when 2007, the bankers burnt the world down, right? They just burned it down, and they fell off the pedestal, right? So when they fell off the pedestal, people don't go to them for advice, you know, and I've been teaching now for about 5 years. I'm like, who do you go to for advice? I'm asking people this. And I started taking a survey of just business owners. Who's that most important person? And believe it or not, accountants still in the top 3. Lawyers still in the top 3. Bankers still in the top 10, not in the top 3 anymore. They rank 7th, right? Behind other. Right. So, I mean, people are going to anybody else in the world but the banker for advice. I mean, they're sitting at the bar at night going, hey, Joe, let me tell you about the business. Right? But they're not going to the banker. So part of what we have to do is give and arm the accountant and the business owner with those answers to the banking test, because believe it or not, we need them, right? We need them to fund growth. The only way a bank makes money is by giving you some. Right? That's the only way it comes in. So what I've tried to do is position what I say, what I write, what we put into our products are the answers to the test. And, you know, following the actions, you know, what should your debt to equity ratio be? What should your debt service coverage ratio be? You know, how much loan should you ask for? Those type of things are really important as part of being that advisor to the small business owner.
And Mike, go ahead. Jump in here, Hector, just to find a couple things, and I'll throw it back to you. See, Mike, you know we've got a good guess when Hector and I fight over who gets to ask the next question. So you threw out a couple more terms there, and I don't want to assume that everyone knows what those are. So, you know, you mentioned, you know, debt to equity ratio. The other two you threw out, debt service ratio, and then also, I can't even remember what the third thing was, but you can. Tell me what those two things are. Define those, if you would.
All right. Well, I mean, debt to equity is, you know, how much in total liabilities do you have to total equity? Now, let me think about it this way. Have you ever bought a house, Kurt?
Certainly.
Yeah. So, I mean, and the bank, you know, wanted you to put down at least 20% of the value of the home or the purchase price of the home. That means the bank put in 80%, right? So 80 divided by 20. What is that, Hector? Use a calculator.
Hold on. I'm running here a spreadsheet here real quick. Yeah, what's it? It's a 4-to-1, right? So you're talking about 4-to-1, right?
Yeah, 80 divided by 20 is 4, right? And what that means in layman's terms, if I'm talking to my friend, down the street, I say, hey, for every dollar you put into the house, you let the bank put in 4, right? The bank will put in $4 for a home when they'll put in, $2.50 to $3 for a business. One of the reasons they do that is because the last thing you'll give up in the world is that house, right? You'll walk out the business, throw a match on it, but when your home comes, to saving your home, you'll do anything you can to save it. So the risk to the bank is a lot less because of the psychological impact as part of it. Of course, it's a real asset and, they can sell it. So that's one. Debt to equity is just a measurement against how much you believe in your own company because you invest in it or you keep profits in it or you keep retained earnings in the company versus what you take on in debt, right? Or you let somebody else invest into it. So that's debt to equity. The next one I used was debt service coverage ratio. You might see it in some reports as DSCR. And what that is a measurement of how much cash do you have to actually pay for the debt, right? And it's calculated. There's about 12 different ways to calculate it. And if I'm going to geek out with you, the one I use is EBITDA divided by the current portion of long-term debt plus interest, right? And the number you want, you don't got to know the equation. If you see DSCR anywhere, you want it to be 1.25 or higher. That means for every dollar you owe, you have access to $1.25 or higher. So when you see that, that's how you read it. So debt service coverage ratio is for every dollar I owe, I've got $1.25 or more to pay for. The last thing I said was, Kurt, how much should you ask for? You don't know how many times that, I'm consulting with small business owners or even accountants, and they'll walk into the bank with their pile of paper and say, hey, I need a loan. And the banker says, okay, how much do you need? And here's the most common response. I don't know, how much you give me. Right? That's the first indication to a banker that you don't know how to run your business. If you don't even know how much to ask for. So what I teach people is how to determine what their working capital need is. That's their short-term credit or their line of credit. Or using EBITDA, we can determine what the debt service and not the debt ceiling is for long-term debt, right? If you take EBITDA times 3, it'll put you in the ballpark of what a bank will lend up to, right, for long-term debt. So you got to make the distinction between what's short-term debt or something I got to pay off this year versus long-term debt, which is what I use to finance my assets, my cars, my land, all those things. Does that help?
It does. And I just want to point out a quick advisory tip to our listeners, and then I'm going to turn it over to Hector. Mike just gave you 3 things that your customers don't know that now you do that you can advise them on. Those 3 questions. So if you're listening to the show, if you're a good advisor, your customers should never walk into the bank again and not be able to answer the question, how much do you want to borrow? Because Mike just gave you the insight on how to help answer that question. And Mike said, and I think it totally makes sense, essentially this is just, are you planning or are you shooting from the hip is really what the banks want to know here, is essentially, is this business owner somebody who is just going to roll the dice, or is this business somebody who actually sits down and comes up with a plan before you execute? We all know Eisenhower was the greatest project manager ever, right? We've all heard, 90% of the plan for D-Day failed, but they also met 90% of the objectives. And that's a whole nother show. And we're not asking business owners to get anywhere close to that. But I just want to point out, this is like, triple stars. Pay attention to this. Go back and listen to what Mike just said, because this is an opportunity for you to create value for your customer. All right, Hector.
Okay. So I quit my banking job about 10 years ago, and I used to be a small business lender. And I was in the bank during the 2006, 2007 years where we were, highly revered because we were giving money everywhere. And then I lived it through 2008 and 2009, where we were not so hot anymore. So I know exactly what Mike is talking about, and that was around the time that I quit banking. Not just because of the financial crisis, just my calling and vocation to become an accountant kicked in. But I lived through the great times of banking and the not so great time of banking during that mini recession we had there. So I wanted to go back and just kind of preface this whole concept of planning. So when we do a business plan before a business gets started, and I want to inspire advisors to think about how it felt when you created a business plan before the business got started. Okay, where you built essentially the narrative of this is what's going to happen, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to execute, this is where we're going to get cash from, this is how we're going to use our cash, this is how we're going to turn it into profit, this is how we're going to hire new people, new talent, research and development, and innovate and go forward. So that whole feeling of planning the business before you get started needs to show up again when you borrow money or when you're trying to borrow money. So in that sense, is if you are in a situation where you need $100,000 because you have a lot of accounts receivable, you landed a couple of good clients, but all of a sudden these clients, take 90 days to pay. You're working with Walmart, with Target, with some of the big guys, and you really were not prepared cash way to do so. And then you run to the bank and say, I need 100,000 pronto, or I need whatever you can give me. And you really don't have a good narrative in place as of why you need that money. So one of the things that advisors are in a great position to do is to help the client build the narrative. I mean, so let's just say that instead of going to the bank with just 2 years worth of tax returns, financial statements, AR aging, all the standard stuff, write a letter in terms of where the business is, how the business is poised to grow, what has happened in the past 90 days to 6 months that has changed the cash flow of the business. How much do you need, whether it's short-term or long-term? And that's a really important part. So Mike, I want to go back to that. Whether it's short-term or long-term, what you're going to do with the money. In other words, telling the banker what you're going to use that money to invest in specifically, and how that investment is going to turn back into more profits. And that's at the end of the day, that's really all the bank needs to know. Of course, there's collateral, as you mentioned, Mike. Obviously, a house is a great collateral, but there's other collateral like your accounts receivable or your inventory or your overall business value. If you have a lot of equity, and again, that's the debt to equity ratio that Mike is talking about. So all those things play into the bank figuring out whether or not you're lendable or whether or not it's a good deal. Because there's two things that could come along. And I remember from my banking days, you can have a client that's very lendable, but the deal doesn't make sense. Okay, like it's happened before. Like I had a doctor's office, very profitable, that wanted to buy a building that was essentially 4 times the size of their current building, and we were looking at the numbers and the narrative and everything, and it looked like they were running at like 80% capacity and they're growing at a 2% rate. Why do you need a building 4 times the size if you're not even at capacity and you're growing at a 2% rate? That made up absolutely no sense. That deal was not approved, and it was like a shoe-in, 800 credit score, pristine credit history, $250,000 in the bank to the business. They were putting 20% down for. It just, nothing about that deal smelled like it wasn't going to go through. But the narrative and the deal made no sense, and that's just a really important piece. That person came in without an accountant. They've always been lent to. They're a doctor, etc. They came in, they turned all the documents, and I was very naive as a banker to try to stop them and say, hey, dude, we need a better narrative for this to make sense. You have to say, look, we're buying another practice and we're merging another practice, or we're bringing in 2 new doctors. None of that stuff was explained in the process. And as we're going through all the due diligence, the deal pretty much turned sour by the time that we got the doctors to actually pay attention to the information that we needed, and the deal fell through. And, and then they lost money on the appraisal. This is like a $4,500 appraisal on a commercial property. They lost a bunch of time. The banker lost time. I'm sure they paid the accountant to update financial statements, but something was lost in translation, which is understanding the nature of the deal. So the nature of the deal, the spirit of business planning, and that excitement about what you're going to do with the money, what's going to happen with the business moving forward, that needs to be explicitly stated as part of the loan document. And the other important piece is whether it's short-term or long-term. A lot of people walk into the bank and say, I need a line of credit. And you say, what do you need a line of credit for? Oh, I got to put a down payment on a commercial property. Wrong, right? That's you don't use a line of credit to put a down payment on long-term debt. That makes no sense. So a lot of these simple things that are taught to bankers right from the get-go, even bankers are not doing a good job at explaining it to their clients. And bankers are being told, go network with CPAs, go network with accountants. They have great relationships with their customers. They're trusted advisors. If you win the trust of a couple of CPAs, you're going to get a couple of deals. And these bankers are out there calling the CPAs and the accountants, trying to build relationships, but they don't know how to talk to the accountants. They don't know how to educate the accountants, and they provide no value because this information you're talking about, Mike, it's behind the scenes. Like you said, it's behind the curtain. So what can we do as accountants to change this paradigm, Mike? Help us, get better at this. Help us get better relationship with our bankers, and help us get our clients into better, cheaper loans, so it actually helps their cash flow rather than hinder their cash flow.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to say just talk to me, but that's probably not the right answer. Hector, here's what I can tell you. I mean, to help an accountant understand it better, first things that you have to know about working with a bank is they're looking for two things. It's, can you pay it, right? Does the deal make sense, as you say? Can you pay it? We'll say EBITDA, but EBITDA is really a substitute word for cash flow. Is there even enough cash being generated through this business to make the payment? The second thing they'll look at is, will you make the payment, right? That's about you. When you talk about 800 credit score, that's about you. So will this person make the payment, and is there enough cash to actually do it? Those are the two things you have to match. Now, what I would tell every accountant, and what I do is, if you have a relationship with a banker, and maybe several bankers, I would have a relationship with several different banks, ask them the questions. Hey, listen, I think you look at debt to equity. I think you look at debt service coverage. I think you look at these type of things. Where do you want my clients to be? And I can help them be there, right? Nobody's asking the question. They just think, oh, there's enough cash here. There's a little bit of a deal flow. We'll throw it through to see what happens. But what you have to do is, the banker is the advocate of the customer. When you provide him with your financial statements, and like you said, help them tell the story, he's got to go sell it to the loan committee, right? Just like you said, it just didn't make sense. The deal didn't make sense. You have to arm him with the right information. When you're talking about lines of credit, the things you need to know is what's called your cash gap, or the financial gap, because your line of credit is designed to cover that. So the three levers that you have is inventory days, accounts receivable days, and accounts payable days. You have to know how your cash moves through the business, and I teach a little seminar called The Speed of Cash that focuses all around that and how to build your line of credit out. So my advice is, ask your banker what the answers to the test are. They know what a good deal looks like, and they know what a bad deal looks like. If you know, you can put your customers in the best position, or your clients in the best position to also be funded.
And remember, the banker it's a salesman. The banker wants to sell the deal for you. The banker is not the underwriter. Now, some of the bankers will tell you, I don't know what the underwriter will say, but this is more or less what I think. Or some will tell you, the underwriters look for this, look for that. And look, as accounting professionals, we have to be ethical, and we can't structure deals. Like, we're not going to sit there and lie on financial statements to help our clients get loans, because obviously that would be counterproductive. That would have a ton of liability. But sometimes just simple presentation, right? Not something that changes the financial statements. Same net income, same assets, but just simple presentation makes a big deal. Let me give you an example, okay? And this is an example from my banking days. If you're having a lot of talks with your lawyer all of a sudden, okay? So let's say, for example, that for the last couple of years, you spend no more than $1,000 with an attorney. And then suddenly this year, you're spending $25,000 with an attorney. And it's clearly shown on the financial statement, because there's a line called legal expenses. If you don't explain that up front, like, hey, we're structuring a deal, we're buying an asset, we're buying someone out, and you don't actually say why you're talking to your lawyer, what is the underwriter going to say? Oh, they're in trouble. They're being sued. They're at risk of getting, of having something that will hinder their cash flow. So right. So the presentation is really important. Without changing the numbers, you need to almost look at the financial statement and say, look, if I was a third party looking at, because as accounting professionals working with our clients, most of us have probably been working with our clients 3 years or more by the time they go into the bank. So we know the story, and we think our client is good, and we think our client will pay back, and we have this good relationship with our clients. So we come in very humbly thinking that, yeah, of course, our great client is going to get a loan. But then we don't think about how a third party that has never seen these financial statements, how they're going to see this. I'll give you another example. Let's say that all of a sudden you have your payroll expenses go down. Now, if you don't have a narrative explaining why your payroll expenses go down, and you're an underwriter, by the way, underwriters are pessimists. Like they are, like if you look for underwriter in thesaurus next to it says pessimist, that will look at a financial statement and they can see the negative side of every single number. For example, if sales double, we're excited because they double the growth. Pessimists say grew too fast, right? If payroll goes up, you're excited because you hired a new star employee. What is the underwriter going to say? Oh, payroll doubled. I mean, that means that these people are getting very inefficient. They have to hire more people to do the same work. If payroll goes down, you would get excited because your overhead went down. The pessimists or the underwriters say, what if they lost their star employee and they lost the capacity to sell? So like all these numbers, all these single numbers can, especially if there's a change, right? Bigger than last year, smaller than last year, or growing faster than sales, growing slower than sales. Every single of these numbers and changes through the years will cause a relationship. And these relationships sometimes are spotted by the underwriter immediately. Sometimes they run it through a computer system, and the computer system tells them what to look at. And you can't lie. This is all mathematical. These are the same models the IRS uses for quote unquote red flags when all of a sudden you have more auto expenses or more entertainment expenses or more travel expenses, or the ratio doesn't jive with the industry. All these tools are out there on both on the consumer side and on the banker side, but there are more bankers using these tools than consumers. And then the consumers, this is why they feel that bankers, they just take your documents and say no and give you no explanation, because they assume that you understand how banking works. And then all of a sudden you become really frustrated. And then it becomes a snowball effect in a very negative way, because the more loans you request, the more they hit your credit, the more, the less desirable you seem. So it can go down, the downward spiral potential of asking for loans or getting declined is pretty steep. So Mike, I wanted to kind of change gears a little bit and talk about specifically the tool that you have called Cash Flow Tool. And I'd like to ask you, because, let's take this into tangible means. How can a tool, and this is the time where we'll give you a free plug for your app, how can a tool help a small business owner or an accountant look at these things? And then we'll switch over to, I wanted to ask you about the 7-minute conversation you want to have with each client. But give us a quick Reader's Digest version of how a tool helps an accountant or a small business owner see these things different.
Well, Hector, I've been in the reporting world now for 5-6 years, with our regular Finagraph dashboard. And what we came to realize is that a dashboard is always backward looking. I've already made those decisions. They've already happened. I'm just seeing the result in the form of a dashboard. So what you're seeing is all the actions, all the decisions I made 60, 90 days ago end up as the result or the ratio that I see today. We're like going, how do I change behavior? How do I put the information that I'm talking about in the hands of the advisor and the small business owner? So we built Cash Flow Tool with the opposite intention in mind. Instead of focusing on the result and the dashboard, we now put it in the action that you should be taking today, right? Because we think if you do the right action today, make the better decision today, then the result will follow, right? So it's just an opposite approach to reporting, is actually trying to move behavior towards the right action that actually improves the health of the organization. And when I say improves the health, it puts more money in your pocket, right? That's what we're talking about. You're going to make more money. You're going to have more money. You're going to feel better about your business.
So Mike, I want to follow up on what you just said, because we hear terms thrown out a lot like KPI, right? That can mean two things, maybe more, but at least two in my book. And you just made the shift from one to the other, from a key performance indicator to a key predictive indicator. So what you're saying is the cash flow tool actually, instead of just reporting on what happened, is actually going to try to help predict or forecast what you should be doing, in other words. And we're not talking about fortune telling. We're simply trying to provide some insight into future behavior, or maybe some recommendations or suggestions for future behavior. Kind of, if you would, elaborate on kind of the two sides of the KPI coin there.
It's a great observation, Kirk. It really was. The way
I agree.
Here, I'm putting plus points in my book for Kirk.
There you go.
The way we built it was, first of all, it does have some artificial intelligence, machine learning in it. That's patent pending algorithm called cash learn, and that's us taking 25 months of history and looking at the patterns and what you've done and predicting what's going to happen. Right. So, we're already looking at it and telling you, if you continue along this path, here's what you can expect. So it's always, if you always do what you've always done, this is what's going to happen. But beyond that, we're saying, here's the actions. Here are the things that you're doing right now that we think you can change. So we have two different features inside Cashflow Tool. One is the cards, right? So if you think about what we've done is we've built a reporting algorithm that's like a Facebook style feed, and we're on Facebook, so people should understand, how that works. But it's mobile, so these things are always in front of the business owner, which means we're the only cash flow predicting app that has a mobile application that you can see it. If I'm between client meetings, if I'm on the road, if I'm just watching TV at night, I'm seeing things that I'm doing today in my business that maybe are wrong or dumb, right? And trust me, I've done a lot of dumb things, and we built it into the tool. All the dumb stuff I've done. Now, what we do is we take that and we apply that forward, saying, here's what you can expect. And we're analyzing the behavior of everything, every customer that you have, all the things that you do, and predicting forward. And then you can apply what-if scenarios. So instead of guessing what's going to happen if I get a new contract, or guessing, what's going to happen if I hire a new employee, you just plug it in, right? And it's in a heat map style, which means the redder the better, the redder the worse, the greener the better. And if you don't like green and red because it's Christmas colors or whatever you like, I just saw a guy yesterday change his heat map to purple and gold for LSU. So this is purple and gold. So he doesn't like the gold, but he likes the purple.
So what you're saying as a Razorback fan, cardinal red and white would work.
That's right. You can do that. You can do the red and white. So, but what you said, what was the difference between KPI, key performance indicator? Yeah, that's the result. What we went and says, here's the action, key predictive indicator. And I love what you did there. That's the action. So the action equals the result. All we did was just put the emphasis on the action instead of the result.
And sometimes all we need is just a little tiny nudge, right? So let's say we have $80,000 in accounts receivable, and a key predictive indicator would say, look, if you just take 20% of those and you charge upfront, maybe with a credit card, and do pay the fee, the translation in cash, turns in like this. Profit goes a little bit down, but cash comes in. And then what cash allows you to do, with what having cash up front allows you to do, and this is the way I see it, is allows you to take advantage of the deals you couldn't if you didn't have the cash up front. And this is one of the important things, especially for inventory type companies. Many times you can go to a vendor and say, how many of this XYZ widget you have in stock? And they say 120. And you say, look, I'll pay you right now and give it to me at a preferred price. Because you already know from forecasting that in the next couple of months, that widget is going to sell. And a lot of vendors or distributors will love to have deals like that, where all of a sudden somebody will offer to clear the inventory for a better price. But people don't do that because they don't have the cash up front, because they're always struggling to get cash flow. Or the other piece is, if you have cash up front, and just going back to the lending question, if you have cash, obviously your debt to equity is going to be better, and that's a perfect time to ask for a loan. I think a lot of times people forget how important it is to ask for a loan or plan for a loan or plan for cash flow when times are good. People always wait until times are bad, when cash flow's tight, when there's no money, when your customers haven't paid you, when there's a big liability slapped in front of your face, a big tax liability, and then go ask for a loan then. So,
right.
Mike, sometimes cash is more important than profit, and people forget about how important that is, and how much time do we spend. And this will resonate with Kirk. How much time do we spend, micro-analyzing every deal to see if we're making profits, if we're spending too much time, and trying to model by the hour and charge by the hour, instead of just focusing on, things that will turn cash faster, that gives you better opportunities. Something as small as a key predictive indicator saying, hey, if you were to raise your price by 5% to only 50% of your clients, this is what your bottom line profit would look like, therefore give you more cash. So I think that what folks need, and you're right, Mike, sometimes people don't need the information. They need to know what to do. Like there's just so many folks that all they're waiting for is, okay, I got the information. Thank you for the report. But what am I supposed to do? What's next? And I think that's what a lot of folks are missing. So Kirk, do you have any questions on that?
I think we hit that pretty good. Just the idea that focusing on past performance is not going to get you where you want to go. You actually have to start looking at how behavior is going to influence future results and use those insights to help make decisions. And it's interesting, again, I did this earlier. We need to come up with a term for this, maybe a hot tip or something, but just this idea, kind of this counter wisdom, common sense is not so common kind of idea, that maybe the best time to ask for a loan is not when you're short on cash, but when you have a lot of cash. That seems counterintuitive, and there is a balance, right? And I don't want to dive off the cliff into, running a debt-free business, those kind of things, but just that there is some counterintuitive wisdom and insight here, and that's what advisors can bring to their clients. It's easy for me to sit here and go, well, just use common sense to advise your clients. And then we're all scratching our head going, okay, what's common sense? We just said what one thing was when you ask for a loan. So write that down in the category of uncommon common sense.
There you go. Nice, Kurt. What's funny is that I also teach proper debt structure. I don't want to go into that today because that's probably an hour in itself. How to structure debt in your business. But Hector, I want to go back to something you said was the difference between profit and cash. Profit makes you feel good because you see it on paper, but I don't know how many times people say, I made all this profit, where's it at? Right? I don't have any cash. There are 50,000 bankruptcies per year in business. 35% have net profit. So how are these people, they're profitable yet can't pay their bills? And it goes right back to what you said. I got that big Costco contract. It's everybody's dream, but I can't keep up with the orders, right? I grow, right? That's kind of what happens. So what we try to do with Cash Flow Tool is help you see that sooner, right? So you can act faster. Even if it's not looking for a discount like Hector says, maybe it's just making a phone call and making a collection. That could be the action. Hey, just call these people and put more cash in. Or your inventory is too high. If you just reduce it, believe it or not, that's counterintuitive, where you actually, just by not replacing inventory on the shelf, you actually improve cash flow, right? Because you keep the cash in the company that you would normally give back to the vendor. So there's different actions that you can take today that improve your cash flow.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. I appreciate that. And I remember from my banking days that like the bank accounting 101 I used to work for Wells Fargo, actually. The first thing that they said is, there's 3 terms that you have to learn. And I've never forgotten that. And I always try to use it when my clients need financial literacy: profitability, solvency, and liquidity. And these 3 terms, you have to understand what each of them mean. And your customer needs to understand what they mean, because there's a difference between being solvent, having liquidity, or having cash flow, and being profitable. So Mike, as we wrap this up, because we're bumping up to the end of the hour, I want to ask you a 2-pronged question, okay? And the first question is, what is the best business advice you have ever received? And I'll let you think about that. And then the second question is, can you give me a Reader's Digest version of one of the most popular things that you teach at the accounting conferences? I think it's called, this is this 7-minute conversation you need to have with each client. So can you kind of think about it, bundle the 2 answers together, and give us that?
So I'm going to interrupt just for a second here. Hector, I caught you. I know what you just did. You just got away with asking 2 questions at once. I'm going to get you on the next show for that.
Yeah, he snuck that one in, didn't he? The best business advice actually came from my grandfather when I was probably 10 years old. I was one of those guys that just wanted to always win, always succeed, but there was always that one thing that was, and we see it in our business, that it's just outside of our control. Right? It's stuff that happens that you have to operate within the parameters of your surroundings. So he says, hey, control what you can control. right? I mean, focus on that. You've got stuff that you can control, stuff that you can't, and stuff that's important, and they'll meet in the middle, right? So control the important stuff that you can control, and know that you have boundaries, right? It doesn't matter what problem you're trying to solve, there's boundaries. So just control the things that you can control. In this case, I can control all the levers in my business, right? I can control how much inventory I have. I can control how much I spend in salaries. I can control all the things I can control. I have to. Right, so I hope that's the best business advice I've received. The 7-minute conversation was really just something that I forced my accountant to do, because he would just come in and lay financial statements on my desk and go, "Here you go." I'm like going, "Whoa, wait a second! You can't just leave a pile of papers on my desk and expect me to do all the work, right? What I need you to do is tell me what it means." So because I was growing, I had a hotel staffing company, I had 3 bar restaurants, and I had 9 multifamily housing units operating as one business. There's a lot of cash coming in and out. I was always kind of looking for funding. So we created 5 metrics that actually helped me see my business through the eyes of the financials, more like a banker, more like an investor. And there was 5 things. One was just trends. I think everybody on the call gets trends. That's the first. And I call these things IFIs, which means IFIs are initial financial indicators, which means if one of these 5 things are off, I know I got a problem. But if they're all good, I didn't have to waste a lot more time because my business was running the way I wanted it to, and I can move on. Now, the 5 I come up with are just mine. You can come up with anything you want to, but I say just pick 5 things and have a visual real quick about it. So I'd use trends. The second one I did was expense control. And the rule I have for expense control is the change in operating expense should mirror the change in gross profit. Gross profit's all the money you got to spend. You can't spend sales. So the rule there is if you have less money to spend less money, right? So gross profit comes down, I should decrease expenses by the same amount that my gross profit has come down. That way I maintain profitability. IFI number 3 is debt to equity, which we kind of covered already. And I wanted to make sure that if I need a loan, and I'm thinking 12 months out, at that 3 or less, 2.5 was kind of my target. IFI number 4 was EBITDA. Nobody's calling their accountant and say, "Hey, what's my EBITDA?" It's a banker's term for cash flow. So I wanted to know because it helped me determine how much long-term debt I could have, which means EBITDA times 3 equals long-term debt ceiling. If I needed a piece of equipment, I needed to know how much room I had. If the piece of equipment was $600,000 and I only had room for $400,000, that tells me instantly I need to find $200,000 before I go buy that equipment. Then IFI number 5 is the most important, believe it or not, and 60% of businesses are this, and it is the silent killer of businesses. It's called misfinancing. And Hector, they teach that. I teach it at Wells Fargo. Believe it or not, 10 times a year I teach credit analysts at Wells Fargo, and it is the length of the loan should match the life of the asset, right? That's the rule in financing. Misfinancing is when you use the wrong loan product and money gets sucked out of your cash in the form of interest. It's like buying a house with a credit card, right? We wouldn't do that. Great miles, don't get me wrong. You get a ton of miles if you do that. but at 14, 15, 18% interest versus the 3, 4, 5 that you get in a mortgage, that's where the money gets sucked out. People just make the loan payment, but they're making it on the wrong product. So if a banker sees that, they try to move you off of the loan product and put it into a term loan. That's what an accountant should be looking at. And that they look at it in the form of the change in gross fixed assets should equal the change in long-term debt plus retained earnings, the change in retained earnings. That means I bought it with long-term debt or cash. If I didn't, I probably used short-term debt and I need to refinance. So that's the Cliff Notes. Hey, it's a 7-minute conversation that takes me 50 minutes to explain.
So, Mike, I first of all, I just love the idea of a 7-minute conversation. I like the idea that there is something that you can go in as an advisor and talk to your customer about and create value for them in 7 minutes. And what you've been sharing with us throughout this episode is a lot of, it's not really inside financial knowledge, it's just industry knowledge that bankers and accountants have that customers don't because they're not bankers and accountants. If they were, they wouldn't need them. Mm-hmm. So what I want to ask you is, what would you recommend to accountants and bookkeepers? How can they take this accounting knowledge and the banking knowledge that you're sharing, that we're encouraging them to invest time in learning and then making it part of what they offer? How can they do that? What would you say to somebody who says, okay, all this is great, but how would I use it?
You know what? That is the reason why so many people are slow to move into advisory services, right? Because it's foreign. They haven't done it. They're great at bookkeeping. They're great at taxes. But then translating actions for the business owner, it's harder to have that conversation. They're just not as comfortable. So it's a personal development issue, which learn it. Get involved, have those conversations with your banker to understand what the banker needs, and vice versa. If you're a banker, understand what the accountant is doing so you can actually advise the business owner to make the right decision at the right time. Shameless plug for me. If you don't know where to start, get the Finagraph dashboard or cash flow tool, and at least it starts that conversation with our help.
So I want to go a little deeper on this, and I appreciate, you're good at giving a lot of information in a short answer, but I'm going to try to draw a little bit more out of you, if that's okay, because I feel like there's a deep well here. So just this idea of, so one of the skills that I try to teach when I teach about having a why conversation, to me, this 7-minute conversation is a particular theme of a why conversation. Okay, it's this idea of role play. So first of all, I just want to throw out this idea that, okay, if you want to practice being an advisor, find somebody else who wants to practice being an advisor and role play with each other, and use the 7-minute conversation as a theme for it. And so, Mike, what would you offer to somebody who hears that idea and goes, okay, let's do that? How would you give them some counsel on practicing that skill?
Well, I mean, it is a skill. I mean, first of all, you have to understand what the numbers mean. And that's usually why, I've done the presentation so many times. What I need to do is just record it, put it on YouTube, so you can go back and get familiar with what that means and how to have that discussion, right? Because I think one of the disconnects is, Hector used 3 terms: solvency, liquidity, profitability. He's absolutely right. The thing is, it doesn't translate well to the business owner, right? So what we have to do is learn how to communicate in a way that everybody understands, even those people that may be not as sophisticated financially. So I think role playing it is a perfect way. Did you understand it? And I would role play not with another person that's a CPA or an advisor. I'd role play with a business owner. Did you understand what I'm saying? And maybe he's close to you, and actually take that conversation down to a person that maybe doesn't have the same level of awareness and sophistication as you do.
I mean, I think you could simply, what Kirk is saying, what Mike is saying, you could simply go to one client that you want to offer advisory services 6 months down the line, and come to them and say, look, I have a new system in place in which, we try to summarize financial statements into the simple conversations. I'm going to offer this service for free for 3 months. Allows me to just sort of practice these techniques and this process. Would you be willing to do it? I mean, what client's going to say no to that? And then you open the door for them. If they fall in love with it, they're going to start paying for it, whatever it is that you're going to charge in the 4th month. So I think that if you have at least one client you can do it with, that's good enough. And again, if you have zero, if you're just starting brand new from scratch and you have zero business owner conversation experience, unfortunately, this is going to take some time, and it's going to require you to kind of practice it, and don't be bashful about it. I mean, sure. Trends are simple, right? Are my sales bigger or smaller than last year? Expense control. Do I have the opportunity to lower expenses, or what is the effect that lowering expenses will have? Like the classic example is, I had a client that was just like randomly looking to lower expenses, and he focused on the worst thing. He said, we're going to print on the back of previously printed paper, and we're going to save a lot of money that way. And I go to this office, and I see all these papers that have like a X out under it saying, oh, that was the different one. That was the old one. Don't look at that one. Look at this. And we spent 10 minutes to try to decipher which paper we're supposed to look at. And we saved $117 in paper a year, and we spent $10,000 in payroll, we wasted productivity. So it's one of those things that, sometimes you just have to observe things, just not even as an accountant, just look for logic, and does this make sense? And yes, it's something that requires practice. And like Kirk says, I think that anyone that's watching this that sees this is a good idea should research, Finagraph, what they got to say. We're going to be waiting for that YouTube video, Mike. And I think you want to say something.
Yeah, I do. I don't want people to have to go find me. Why don't we do this? Why don't we set up something together as a group, and I'll do the webinar, and you guys can record it and use it for people that follow you. And if that's a resource that Kirk, advises you guys to have.
Excellent. Okay. I love that idea. So, Mike, 2 quick things. First of all, are you going to be at QuickBooks Connect in November?
I am.
Okay. So right now, I'm going to put you on the spot because I'll be there as well. And so we're going to go have a beer, and then we'll be able to see the accuracy of your key predictive indicator that you're about to give. So your prediction for champion of the SEC West football conference right now before season starts, who do you think?
Oh, the West?
Well, that's where LSU and Arkansas are. So I'm getting.
Okay, I know you don't want me to say Aggies, but this Jimbo Fisher thing, I don't know. He's kind of, he's a wild card out there right now. So I might go with Jimbo to this time.
I just appreciate the fact you didn't take the default answer, of Alabama. So you got my respect there.
There you go.
Second, I'd love to do that webinar thing. We'll connect with you online, figure out, what makes sense. But if somebody's listening to this and they want to reach out, learn more about you and Finagraph, where can they find you online?
We're at both cashflowtool.com, we're at finagraph.com, or just, reach me direct, mike@finagraph.com.
Excellent. Well, Mike, this has been a blast. Any last words you want to provide before we sign off?
Cashflowtool.com. No sooner, act faster, avoid failure. That's how I can.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, Mike, thanks very much.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it very much. And, please invite me back if you want to dig deeper on the subject.
Will do.
All right. Thanks, guys.